Hey, welcome. This is a lecture on, you can probably figure it out, the Puritans. So if you've gotten this far, you were able to open the PowerPoint and hopefully you know what you're doing. I'm going to keep a timer on myself and hopefully we'll keep this short. So thank you for giving this a try. I've done these online lectures for a couple of years now. I did it with USHAG a couple of years ago and doing it with my AP Psych classes. What I'd like you to do is listen, take notes at your own speed, try to take as good a notes as you can. A certain way through I've got a link to a video. It's about a 5-minute video. I'd like you to watch that. And then at the very end I've got some questions for you. It would work better for me if you go all the way through this and then go get the questions after and see how many of the questions you can answer just from your notes. If you need to go back and re-watch something or re-listen to it, go for it. And those answers do not need to be textbook perfect. They should be kind of your own understanding, your own words. That is way, way better than having some kind of textbook perfect answer. Okay, let's get started on the Puritans. They're one of the more important colonial groups. I don't actually have a good sense of how much you know, so I'm going to kind of give you a basic background, and then in class tomorrow we can do an activity about them. So here's the background. Who were they? I'll take you through a timeline. I've got the video link for a video called City Upon a Hill. It's not the most interesting video, but it's better than me talking all the time. And then I've got the kind of key aspects of Puritanism. Who were the Puritans? Start with the Protestant Reformation. So the Catholic Church, as you know from Global, was dominant for hundreds and hundreds of years in Europe. And then in the 1500s, that guy, who's that guy? Martin Luther, posted the thing on the door of the church. What was that? Yes, the 95 Theses. By the 1500s, Luther and many others considered the Catholic Church corrupt and decadent, and it was. I hope you know stories of that from Global, but the Pope and the bishops and cardinals were, for the most part, there were some good ones there, but they were mostly fat and rich and lazy, and the church was the biggest landowner in Europe, and the elites of the church lived like they were basically noblemen or aristocrats. And Luther rebels against that and tries to reform the church and starts the Reformation. Another guy that you probably have heard of, may have heard a little bit less about, is John Calvin, and he has a similar message to Luther. People who followed Luther became Lutherans. People who followed Calvin became Calvinists. The Puritans are going to be Calvinists. In England, it takes a little bit of a different tack. England stays Catholic until Henry VIII. And we all know about Henry VIII and all his many wives. He wanted to divorce his original wife, Catherine of Aragon, because she could not bear him a son, and marry Anne Boleyn. The church would not grant him an annulment because divorce was not allowed. And so he breaks off from the Catholic Church and forms something called the Church of England, of which he is head, which is pretty awesome if you're king. You kind of get to have the religion do whatever you want. That's what's known as the Anglican Church. So the Anglican Church is the same as the Church of England. But in most ways, it remains, I just told you why, in most ways, it remains the same as the Catholic Church. And all the corruption, and in fact, the corruption is even more obvious with Henry. He changes the Church of England for political reasons, not really for religious reasons. So those who were trying to reform the church in England turned their attention to reform the Church of England. And that went on through the 1500s and into the 1600s, consumes a lot of English history. If you know anything about the Wars of the Roses or the, what's that, the Glorious Revolution, that's all kind of connected to the Protestants against the Catholics, the Calvinists. The Puritans were a group of people who have their name, which is easy to note, because they wanted to purify the corruption and especially the hierarchy in the Church of England. So you should understand what I mean by corruption, that the church leaders were sinful and kind of a fraud and sleazy, and you should understand hierarchy. They thought there were too many levels in the Catholic Church, too many people telling them what to do, and it had gotten in the way of a true faith between God and the individual. Some Puritans were separatists. Some, they wanted to break away. Some wanted to reform the Church of England from within. The original Pilgrims are separatists. The more important group, maybe not as well known, that came a little bit later, about 11 years later, formed the Massachusetts Bay Colony, were reformers. That's a quick background, 5 minutes or less. There are two groups that start everything. Okay, so I'll take you through some key dates. 1517, Martin Luther posts his 95 Theses. 1538, Henry VIII separates the Church of England from Rome, as I talked about on the last slide. The late 1500s, Calvinism develops in Europe, originally in Switzerland. The Puritans emerge in England. That's all 1500s, way, way back when. We're going to turn our attention to the 1600s because that's when American colonization really begins. 1620, the Pilgrims, they're not the first colonists. In fact, they're like the third, but they're the ones we know of early on. So the Pilgrims sail for New England aboard the Mayflower, and they form the colony right here, Plymouth Colony. I may have more to say about them in class tomorrow. On the way, they signed the Mayflower Compact. You should know about that as well. And they established Plymouth Colony. 10 years later, the Puritans sailed for New England and established the Massachusetts Bay Colony. That's this big green part, but in the beginning it starts out of these small little settlements, and they settle in Boston. And they are, over the 1600s, going to grow bigger and bigger and eventually take over the Plymouth Colony. And so the Massachusetts Bay Colony is a little less well known in some circles, but the more important one. Just a couple of dates. I'm not going to really talk about these too much. Roger Williams gets exiled from the Massachusetts Bay Colony and ends up forming a new colony down here, the Rhode Island, what becomes Rhode Island. Then Anne Hutchinson is exiled. And you notice this all happens very quickly. They get there in 1630, and within a few years, you've exiled some religious rebels. 1675-78, about 2 or 3 generations later, there's a big war against the Native Americans called King Philip's War. You may have never heard of that war. I'll be talking about that this week. And that's it. So that's kind of some key dates. But mostly I want you to be familiar with 1620, the Plymouth Colony gets established, 1630, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Go ahead and watch this video and take notes on it. You can pause this and come back to it or whatever. I'm going to keep going. What ideas did the Puritans have? They thought the following. Number one, they thought the world is evil. They thought it was a sinful place. You can see what was going on in the Catholic Church at the time, that they had evidence for that. They disliked hierarchies. They thought that the people above you are kind of corrupt and just get in the way of your relationship with God, as I had mentioned before, and that the best way to learn about God was that He had been revealed through the Bible, and that word was the true word. And so that's going to have an interesting implication, because this is going to cause them to have all sorts of characteristics which are going to lend themselves to things like revolution and democracy. But one thing it's going to lend themselves to is they thought everybody should read, boys and girls, men and women, and so it's going to, the early Puritan colonies are going to emphasize reading and thus education in a way that England never did. They thought they were on a mission from God. I always think of the old Blues Brothers movies, because the Blues Brothers were on a mission from God too. They thought it was their job to set an example for the rest of the world. They originally tried to do it in England. Some of them left and went to the Netherlands. But eventually they thought, we're going to go to the New World where there's not all this corrupting influence. We're not going to get hassled, and we're going to be able to do create our utopian society, our perfect society, and not be corrupted by the evils of the world. And so they see the Americas as this special, untainted place, and where they are going to complete their mission or embark on their mission to create a model faith community. They also thought that they must all work hard, and this gets tricky. They thought that if you were one of the chosen ones who was supposed to be saved, then God would bless you with success. So you didn't know if you were chosen, and you should strive to work hard and be worthy of that blessing. So they were kind of fierce in two ways: their devotion to faith and their belief that they had to work hard. They're like a prosperous, successful farmer showed that he was one of the devoted ones. So the religion is everything for them, but it has all these spin-off effects that make a big difference. So those are the 5 things they thought. And I only have one more slide, so I'm doing pretty well. What did these beliefs lead to? A strict moral code. So the Puritans are known, they actually gave us an adjective called puritanical. Puritanical means like obsessively strict and narrow view about what kind of belief is allowed. So the movie Footloose, as you know, is about a kid from the big city who loves to play music and dance, and he goes to a small town that frowns on dancing. That's kind of a leftover idea that the Puritans would have had, frowning on too much fun and excess of fun, although they did believe in music and things like that. The second thing that their religious beliefs led to, that really didn't have anything to do with religion but has important implications for the colonies, is because they didn't like the hierarchy of the church and they were battling the hierarchy of the government in England, they ended up distrusting authority, and they believed in the power of the individual to create his or her own faith, or find his or her own faith through the Bible with God. That is going to have big implications apart from religion here in the colonies, but that's a big one: their distrust in authority. The third thing about their beliefs is they moved off to the New World, and they distrust authority, so they kind of have to work everything out by themselves. So they end up having town meetings and hashing things out. Not everybody was allowed to participate in the town meeting, and not everybody was allowed to vote, but those that could, the elect, meaning the chosen ones, because there's no bishop or pope or cardinal or king, it ends up being much more democratic than England had been, despite what you saw in the video, which is true about Winthrop banishing people who dissented. So there's this reliance on the community for survival in the wilderness and harsh, unforgiving New England, but there's also this emphasis on group decision making. And then, like you got from the video, there's this city on a hill attitude that we are to be a model community for the rest of the world, and I think that has a deep, deep impact on the colonial era and maybe beyond. And then finally, this idea of a Puritan or Protestant work ethic, and I said they had to work hard in order to show their God's favor with them, get this Puritan work ethic. All right, that's it. There's the link to the homework questions. If you click on that, you should be able to open up the different questions. And I will see you tomorrow. I think I did a pretty good job there. Kept it at right about